Hey guys, welcome to Ukrainian Couple, and in this video we're going to talk about what the latest Ukrainian offensive may look like. The other day I saw a Guardian article about 5 likely scenarios that may happen in Ukraine, and it paints a pretty grim picture because it effectively says that Russia and Ukraine are like a stalemate right now, and Ukraine doesn't really have a good way to counterattack, but neither does Russia. I mean, the article also goes on to say that Russia wants to keep hammering the eastern part of Ukraine and around the Donbass area and the Bakhmut area. And Ukraine will also rely on spot attacks and these latest HIMARS attacks and missile attacks on Russian ammunition depots and stuff like that. And neither side is going to reach a big victory anytime soon. And in the southern side, Russia also kind of hit a deadlock around Kherson because it moved reinforcements down there, but they're not really doing much. But with 25% of Ukrainian land firmly under Russian control right now, well, firmly I use in quotation marks because not so much, right? The Russians, want to hold referendums over there, the pseudo-referendums, as fast as they can. We also have to realize that as we move into the winter, the Ukrainian humanitarian needs are, pretty bad right now. The crisis is growing. There's a lot of these abandoned and ruined homes in north of Kiev, right, in Chernihiv, in Bucha, and all those areas. They remain uninhabitable, and all these people that used to live there, they need a place to live, right? So they have to resort to living in some refugee camps within Ukraine or in some temporary housing somewhere here and there. And there's really no money for reconstruction, right? Like, these houses have to be rebuilt, their infrastructure has to be rebuilt, and Ukraine's grappling with the money issues right now. Another thing we have to keep in mind is that winter is coming, as they say, and Ukraine has to make sure it has enough coal reserves, gas reserves. It has to have electricity going for all of its areas, and including the areas around the front lines, which they really can't do. They also have to maintain the army and support the army with energy, right? With electricity, all that kind of stuff. And that takes a huge toll on Ukraine as a state, right? And its ability to deliver these energy supplies throughout the winter. I mean, analysts in the West feel that this could provoke a migration crisis in Ukraine. After all, 10 million Ukrainians already left as of August, I believe. And the cold weather in the winter could, increase this number by 2 or 3 more million people. And I mean, another thing you have to remember is that 25 million, I think, of Ukrainians are going to be internally displaced in Ukraine, and that's a lot of people putting strain on certain cities, certain areas of Ukraine where people are already feeling acute issues. But what about Ukraine's and Russia's counteroffensive? Well, it seems like both sides are pretty much deadlocked. Neither can move either way, considerably, right? With Russia, it's obvious things like poor morale, Russia's losing momentum, the euphoria, the conscripts that were eager to fight in the beginning, this is going down. Support at home is basically non-existent right now, I think, for the most part, because we're seeing that Russia has to get conscripts to fight. They're trying to find, people to fight like within neighboring countries like in Iran and North Korea, whatnot. They're trying to get people to fight from there. But for Ukraine, the picture isn't so rosy either, right? Ukraine really lacks tanks, APCs, armored personnel carriers, armored vehicles. I mean, in any warfare scenario, what you need is first you need to hire the ballistic missiles or the missiles. I mean, Ukraine has a lot of guns, a lot of armor, that kind of stuff, but until it gets more heavy weapons, heavy vehicles especially, it's going to be difficult for Ukrainian to move ahead, right? I mean, to do any kind of counteroffensive, you need to take the land, right, physically, right? You can't just fire the missiles and then expect the enemy to kind of get scared and run away. No, you need people to move in, right? And Ukraine can't do that at the moment. I mean, that sort of power to, push the war into the next phase is sort of in the West's hands, I think, and the West has to decide whether or not it wants Ukraine to just survive or they want it to win, right? Does the West want, like, Ukraine to be the Vichy France? France used to be occupied by Nazi Germany, by Hitler. The northern part was occupied while the southern was like the free France. Does the West want Ukraine to be divided in the free Ukraine and occupied Ukraine? If that's the meant, right, in the next, year or so, that's going to be horrible because people are going to get used to it, right? Maps troops may have to be withdrawn, and nobody wants to see that. I don't want to see that. Europe doesn't want to see that. I mean, there are some successes on the Ukrainian side, though. I mean, the past week, they've been blowing up bridges over the Dnipro River quite successfully, around the Kherson area at least. I mean, right now, as far as I know, Kherson has no usable bridges, and Russia has to use these pontoons to basically move people around and make sure that they get across. And these bridges aren't reliable. They can't really move equipment fast enough for people at all, really. And then Ukraine is really waiting for the Lend-Lease thing to start with the United States, where United States is projected to give, Ukraine the much needed tanks, the much needed, personnel carrier. We're seeing reports that Ukrainians are being trained in the United States to use the fighter jets, the A-10 jet, which is a really cool airplane. It's very utilitarian, but it's really cool. Can withstand rocket fire and all that stuff. And that may give Ukrainians some power to actually succeed with their counterattacks. And then there's also these stories about Russia trying to turn off the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is located in Enerhodar in occupied territory. And but that's not going to happen, I think, because if any fallout in that area is going to trigger Article, I think it's Article 6 or 2, and NATO's going to be involved because this thing really endangers Europe, right? European safety and European well-being. So this is not a joke, right? And I think Russia knows that, so I don't think anything's going to happen over there. Speaking of Ukraine updates, if you're interested, you should check out this YouTuber Denis Davidov. He's pretty cool, and he's very meticulous when it comes to covering all the bases. He makes sure he doesn't miss any of the news, and he goes into the detail of what's going on every single day and how the front line moves. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, he says that Russia moved down 25,000 troops west of the Dnieper River, and that's pretty sizable force, right? According to Denis, he expects there's going to be another counteroffensive from the Russian side to see what happens in that area. Basically, Russians are going to see how far they can do a counteroffensive before they can hold a final referendum or whatever they want to do. Well, anyway, the fact that Russia is channeling, people over there in the south means that Russia was probably pretty much destroyed in the persistent, consistent attacks on Kryvyi Rih and Mykolaiv direction, in that direction, right? Let's just hope that Ukraine also has something up its sleeve, that it can repel that counterattack and it can go further into Kherson to at least try to derail the plans of the referendum that Russia's going to have there. So will Russia collapse in the next 6 months? Are we going to see a massive withdrawal of the Russian troops from Ukraine, from Crimea? For sure, I don't think Russia's going to collapse. I mean, it's going to sustain itself. Terrible countries have learned how to cope with sanctions, or how to repress their citizens. Look at Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. We all know about Syria. We all know that this country is partitioned, and it's been partitioned for some time now, for a decade. And it seems to sort of function. It seems to exist. It's not going anywhere. We all hope that Russia will kind of have a realization that what they're doing is wrong. They will realize that they failed. They can't take Ukraine. They can't hold this territory that they have. They're going to deal with crushing sanctions. People in Russia are going to be unhappy. They're going to be disappointed. They're going to want to rise up against the system. Not very likely, but we all hope that's going to happen. And they will want to push for a peace treaty very soon, and that will give Ukraine good negotiating position to try to take back their territory, to get their territory that belongs to them. Since 1991, I mean, that is the goal of Ukraine, to get to that point and not any other point, really. But that's all speculation. I think we're going to see a better picture of what's going to happen in Ukraine around September, right? Maybe the middle of September. But yeah, so that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this little update of what's happening in Ukraine. And until next time, guys, take care.